Elon Musk recently crossed a net worth of $300 billion. That is more wealth than the entire GDP of countries such as Greece, Portugal, or Finland. If he spent $1 million a month, he would need 25,000 years to spend all of that money. Even if he would spend $1 million a day, he will need more than 821 years to spend $300 billion. Imagine how your life would look like if you could spend $1 million a day. Elon Musk is 50 years old. Let's assume he will live for another 50 years. He will have to spend $6 billion every single year, or $16.5 million every single day for the rest of his life to be able to spend all of that money within his lifetime. Can he do it? You can ask him on Twitter. The only problem with this wealth is that it is not real. This wealth only exists on paper. If he tried to turn it into real money, he might end up losing all of his fortune. When the CEO sells off his shares when the company is barely profitable, that can scare off investors. An oversupply of Tesla shares can easily drag the stock price down. On top of that, he will have to pay a 20% capital gain tax, further diminishing his net worth. So, at the end of the day, he is not as rich as he might appear on the Forbes list. But that's not a big deal. When the world's richest man wants some cash, he can simply borrow money by putting up some of his Tesla shares as collateral. Elon Musk can walk into a bank and say, "How about you loan me $100 million? In case if I won't be able to pay back, I will give you the authority to sell my Tesla shares." Since Tesla is booming, the bank isn't taking any risk, so they will loan him as much money as he wants at 1 or 2%. Elon Musk or any billionaire can access their wealth that exists only on paper without paying taxes, since you do not pay taxes on debt. In 2012, he bought his first mansion in Bay Area for $17 million. Back then, Tesla's stock price was just $6. Ideally, he should have sold $17 million worth of Tesla shares to buy that mansion. But instead, he bought the shares as collateral and took a mortgage. Since then, Tesla's stock price has grown by 17,000%, while he only had to pay a 2% mortgage rate. If he had sold his shares, he would have paid a 20% capital gain tax and would have missed the opportunity to grow his shares by 17,000%. Do you realize now why billionaires love debt so much? Here is another strategy. Buy a piece of art for $10 million. Pay some journalists to create a buzz around it. Pay some experts to write about what a great piece of art it is and why it is worth $100 million. Go to a bank, give them your piece of art as collateral, and boom, you can borrow up to $100 million in cash at 1 or 2% interest rate. Now you can buy a mansion, a yacht, or throw a huge party. Just make sure to make the minimum payment when your business generates some cash at the end of the year without selling any of your shares and paying millions in taxes. If you think it ends there, then you have no idea to what extent billionaires love debt. It's the 1990s. The British economy is suffering. Inflation is high, unemployment is rising, and the government is in chaos. Britain had to devalue its currency to survive, but it was part of the ERM, or the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, which fixed all European currencies against each other to prevent currency fluctuations to make it easier for businesses to trade across Europe. The demand for the British pound kept declining as Britain fell into a recession. Hence, the Bank of England had to buy billions of dollars worth of pounds to keep the pound at the same rate as other European currencies. While it was bad news for Brits, it was a billion-dollar opportunity for George Soros. By looking at the numbers, he realized that sooner or later the Bank of England would have to devalue the pound, even if that meant leaving the ERM. Soros was one step away from a gold mine. He went to various hedge funds, borrowed billions of pounds at a very low rate, and then sold them in the forex market in exchange for German marks. The idea was simple. When the British pound will collapse, Soros will buy those pounds cheaper and return them, pocketing the difference. On September the 16th, when the president of the Bundesbank hinted in an interview that it is possible for some currencies to come under pressure. That night, when Europe was asleep, Soros began calling all the major banks, or in fact, any bank, to borrow as many pounds as possible. By morning, Soros borrowed and sold over $10 billion worth of pounds. The Bank of England was in absolute disarray. The British pound was collapsing. The Bank of England purchased $27 billion worth of pounds, raised interest rates to 15%. But it was too late already. The entire market began to sell their pounds after Soros' move. Before the day ended, England left the ERM and devalued the pound, and Soros profited over $1 billion. Without spending a single penny out of his pocket, he borrowed billions of pounds, broke the Bank of England, and pocketed $1 billion. Can you really say that is bad after that? It's 2005. Michael Burry is going through mortgage-backed securities, and he's suspicious. Something unusual comes up. He can't believe his eyes, so he starts digging farther and farther. But the more he digs, the more he's shocked. Every mortgage-backed security is filled with multiple junk loans. In fact, these loans are given on the basis that the borrower doesn't have a deadline to pay the principal. They can even skip the interest on the interest, which meant that even a high school dropout with no job or savings could buy a house. Ideally, the rating agencies would give these loans a C rating, but investment banks pile them together with good loans, and boom! Now you have AAA loans. If a small minority of these borrowers will default on their loans, it will drag down the entire market. In 2007 alone, $500 billion worth of these loans were sold. That's when Michael Burry shorted mortgage-backed securities, exactly like Soros shorted the pound. He borrowed as many mortgage-backed securities as possible and immediately sold them in the open market, hoping that when the market will crash, he would be able to buy these securities at a much lower price and return them back. Everyone thought he was crazy betting against the housing market, but this
down 1.7% here, loss of 37 points or so. Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%.
Michael Burry walked away with a personal profit of $100 million. All of that was done with debt. But not everything is sunshine and rainbows. It's April 2020. Melvin Capital, Citadel, and a few other hedge funds decided to make a few $1 billion by bankrupting another barely surviving company called GameStop. By that time, the hedge funds had already shorted 140% of the total stocks. More shares were shorted than actual shares in circulation. It was a matter of time before the stock collapses, and hedge funds closed the deal with a few $1 billion for their investors. But something went wrong. A Reddit user realized that the only way these hedge funds can get out of this deal is by purchasing back all of the existing shares. If he purchases GameStop shares and holds them long enough, these hedge funds will pay whatever price you want to buy back the shares, because if they don't, they will keep paying interest since these shares have been borrowed. The Reddit post went viral and everyone began buying GameStop shares to the point where the stock price soared. Hedge funds purchased the stock at $5 to $10, but now had to buy them back at $300 or $400 to give them back. The news broke the internet. Wall Street was in absolute chaos. For the first time, retail investors beat Wall Street at their own game. At this point, the hedge funds knew that if they didn't stop this rebellion, they might go bankrupt. First, they pushed Robinhood to stop selling GameStop shares on their platform. Soon, other brokers followed. Even though they stopped the rebellion, hedge funds ended up losing almost $13 billion in the process. That is a powerful tool, but it's not for everyone. It can be your best friend or your worst enemy. Even if you have hundreds of millions of dollars stashed in your bank account, not a single smart businessman will use that money to grow the business. Instead, let the banks know that you and your companies, for example, actually have the money and borrow the same amount of money to finance your operations. At the end of the year, when it's time to pay taxes, you can claim that you did not make any profit on paper since you owe the bank so much money. Suddenly, instead of paying a 21% corporate tax, you pay nothing. And in case you need money to finance your lavish lifestyle, use the company's fund to pay for your private jet, expensive restaurants, and luxurious hotels, and write them off as a business expense at the end of the year. That's what almost every company does in the US or anywhere else in the world. Before taking advantage out of debt, any rational investor would tell you that you have to run your numbers first.